Everyone expected Chicagoland to be a story about whether Shane Van Gisbergen could survive on an oval, and in a way, it was. He finished 25th, struggled all night, and got knocked out of the in-season challenge. But that's not the story people are actually talking about tonight, because on lap 45, Van Gisbergen made contact with Austin Hill and sent him backing hard into the turn 3 wall. A heavy hit. And afterward, Hill didn't call it a racing incident. He called it deliberate. He believes Van Gisbergen wrecked him on purpose. And here's the part that makes this genuinely explosive. This is now the third time these two drivers have crashed into each other in the last 4 weeks. 3 times. In a month. So the question tonight isn't just what happened at Chicagoland. It's whether the most respected road racer in the sport just sent an unmistakable message to a rival who has been tormenting him all season. Today we break down exactly what happened, why Hill thinks it was intentional, the full history between these two, and whether the evidence actually supports the revenge theory. Stay with me. Welcome back to Freedom Line News, the channel where we don't just chase the drama, we break down what really happened. If you're new, hit subscribe. This community is growing every week. Let's get into it. Let's start with the incident itself. It happened around lap 45 of the Euro 400. Van Gisbergen and Austin Hill made contact, and Hill went backing hard into the wall between turns 3 and 4, a genuinely heavy impact that brought out a caution and ended Hill's competitive night. And Hill was direct about how he saw it. He believed the contact from Van Gisbergen was intentional, not a mistake, not two cars getting together in traffic, a deliberate act. Now here's the immediate context that makes that accusation land differently. Van Gisbergen was having a miserable night on the oval, exactly the kind of night he'd openly warned about after Sonoma. He qualified 30th. He ran 30th through the first stage. He spent much of the race sacrificing track position to make setup changes, trying to find any speed at all in a car that didn't have it. He would ultimately finish 25th and get eliminated from the in-season challenge tournament by Ryan Blaney, who finished 7th. So this was a frustrated driver, deep in the field, having the kind of night that tests anyone's patience. Whether that frustration spilled over into the contact with Hill is exactly the question everyone is now asking. And to understand why Hill immediately assumed intent, you have to understand the history between these two, because it is remarkable. This was not their first run-in. It was their third in 4 weeks. Go back to Pocono on June 14th. The two were involved in contact there. Then go to San Diego on June 21st. They crashed again, and this one is critical, because that incident came during a battle for the lead, and it was Austin Hill who locked his brakes on a restart and slid up the track, destroying not just his own race, but both Trackhouse cars, Van Gisbergen and his teammate, Connor Zilisch. Van Gisbergen had been leading. Zilisch had been leading for the first time in his Cup career. Hill's mistake wiped out both of them, and Van Gisbergen was furious afterward, describing himself as filthy about it. So when you line it up, Pocono, then San Diego, where Hill took him out of a race he was leading, and now Chicagoland, you can see exactly why Hill braced for payback and why he interpreted the contact as deliberate. From Hill's perspective, he'd tangled with Van Gisbergen 3 times in a month, and the third one came right after he'd cost Van Gisbergen a shot at a win. That's a textbook revenge setup. If you were Austin Hill, you'd probably assume the same thing. But here's where we have to be honest and careful, because this is the authority lane, and the easy story isn't always the accurate one. Was it actually deliberate? Let's weigh it fairly. On the side of intent, the history is undeniable. The timing right after the San Diego incident is suspicious, and Van Gisbergen had every human motive to be frustrated with Hill specifically. On the other side, Van Gisbergen was running deep in the field in a car he was fighting all night, on a slick 1952-mile oval that he openly admits is his weakest environment, at a track no one in the field had raced since 2019. Contact happens constantly in those conditions. Van Gisbergen himself is still learning how these cars behave on ovals in traffic. So there's a genuine, plausible, innocent explanation. A struggling road course specialist in a difficult car on an unfamiliar oval simply got into another driver the way drivers get into each other on intermediate tracks every single week. The honest truth is that only Van Gisbergen knows for certain what his intent was. Hill believes it was on purpose, and given their history, that belief is completely understandable. But belief isn't proof. What we can say for certain is that the pattern is real, the frustration was real, and this rivalry now has 3 chapters in 4 weeks, with no sign of cooling off. Whether Chicagoland was payback or just racing, these two are now officially a story that isn't going away. So what does this actually mean going forward? A few things. First, for Van Gisbergen's season, despite the rough night and the elimination from the tournament, he remarkably still sits 14th in the championship standings, clinging to a chase playoff position. His oval struggles are real and continuing. Chicagoland was exactly the kind of result he predicted when he called himself the weak link. But he hasn't fallen out of the playoff picture yet. Second, this rivalry with Hill now has real heat, and NASCAR has a long history of these things escalating before they resolve. 2 drivers who keep finding each other on track, with one now openly accusing the other of intent, is the kind of feud that tends to produce another chapter sooner rather than later. And third, the broader takeaway. The road course magician is being humbled by the ovals, and the frustration of that transition may be starting to show up in how he races. Whether tonight was deliberate or not, a driver used to winning is now learning what it feels like to fight in the pack, and that's a difficult adjustment for anyone. The race itself, for the record, was won by Chase Briscoe, his first victory of the season, holding off his Joe Gibbs Racing teammate Christopher Bell by just over a quarter of a second in a Joe Gibbs Racing 1-2-3 finish. But the conversation coming out of Chicagoland belongs to Van Gisbergen and Hill. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Van Gisbergen deliberately wrecked Austin Hill as payback for San Diego? Or was it just an oval struggling road racer getting into someone the way drivers do every week? And where do you think this rivalry goes next? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to Freedom Line News, where we cover every NASCAR story with the detail it actually deserves. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.